Am I already a rusty pilot? Let's find out on this episode of In the Hangar. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of In the Hangar. I'm Baylee Ward.
And I'm Christy Wong. Today's episode is brought to you by some really great sponsors like Flying Eyes. More on them in the links below and at the end of the show. But first, Baylee, you've got a really great question that I think warrants a conversation. And who better to talk about it today than our own ambassador, Pat Brown?
How are you?
Good. Pat, thank you for joining us on the show today.
It's good to meet you, Baylee.
My personal experience here recently, obviously, I got my pilot's license when I was in high school,
Right.
but I have recently transitioned into college, and aviation has kind of become a struggle for me recently. So
Those darn kids and their priorities.
you know.
You would think she would prioritize flying, but no.
Well, that's the thing. I'm trying. So, and that's why you're here today. So, Pat, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, you introduced me as being the ambassador, Texas ambassador, and that program actually ended about a year ago. Long story made short, we pretty much worked ourselves out of jobs. We were so successful in helping start flying clubs and things like that, and it was a case of diminishing returns. And we knew that at some point that would happen, and it happened last year. About 6 months before that, I had actually talked to headquarters, and I had asked them, I told them basically I want to slow down a little bit. I was doing 25, 30 rusties a year and traveling all over, and it was just getting too much. And they said, what would you like to do instead? And I said, well, we have this high school scholarship program, flight training scholarship program. We give away $1 million a year in flight training scholarships. And the year prior to that, we had tried a mentor program where each of the ambassadors mentored a certain number of kids that were in their flight training. I really enjoyed that. So I said, well, why don't you just let me take all the mentors, all of the kids. So I've got 140 kids that I'm mentoring through their flight training all over the country.
Amazing.
Good
All
for
over the
you.
country.
All over the country.
Not just in Texas.
Not just in Texas,
So for
140
AOPA,
kids.
you are mentoring these high school kids.
All over the country.
Do you want to mentor non-high school kids?
Well,
Or college kids,
Yeah,
maybe?
exactly.
I'll give you my phone number. You're welcome
Okay,
to call.
perfect.
No, it is an awesome job. And out of the about 140 this year so far, we've had 54 or 55 that have completed their private pilot certificate.
That's amazing.
We've had a handful that have completed their instrument ratings. We've
Wow.
actually had a few that have gotten their flight instructor certificates.
That's awesome.
And it's just awesome to get these pictures. They all, when they've got their certificate in their hand, they all send me a picture. You know, they got these huge smiles on their faces, and
Yes.
it's just an amazing privilege to be able to talk to these kids.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's so
Well,
awesome.
let's talk about rusty pilots
You bet.
for a
That's what
second,
we're here
because these
for.
are individuals that have gotten their pilot certificate however long ago, and now they want to get back in the cockpit because maybe they haven't kept up on it. What even defines a rusty pilot?
You feel rusty?
Yeah.
Enough said.
Right?
You're a rusty pilot. If you've been out of the cockpit for a while, I mean, there are basic things that we all forget. You could name anything, but we all tend to forget, oh, what's that airport symbol? Or oh, how do you read a METAR? Those kind of things. We get used to pushing the plain language button on the briefing platforms, but knowing how to read METARs and TAFs in coded form is really, really important for a lot of different reasons that we can go into later if you want to. But those are the kinds of airspace. Airspace is a huge thing, especially post 9/11. You don't remember 9/11.
No.
You probably don't either.
I do. No, I do. Believe
I'm
it or
trying to
not.
compliment you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to
You say thank
compliment you.
you?
Yeah, I was totally born after 9/11.
Yep. Okay.
I was 19 years old when 9/11 happened.
Okay, well, you
I've
could-
just aged and dated myself, and that's okay.
could've
I look
fooled
good
me,
for my
but-
age.
But post 9/11, all of a sudden, things that were just kind of a slap on the wrist became they may take your certificate, and TFRs begin to pop up unexpectedly, and so on and so forth. So. Those kind of things become kind of important not to get rusty on. And, I was a rusty pilot. In I guess it would have been about 1990 and 89, somewhere around in there. I quit flying, family obligations, work, mortgage. I mean, all the stuff that for most of us, the reasons that we quit flying for a period of time. when I came back into it, there wasn't any program like this. So I had to figure out, where do I go to get my medical? I mean, I knew I needed one, but where do I go to get my medical? Where are there flight schools in the area? What do I?
We didn't have Google back then.
No, we didn't have Google back then. We had something. Let me explain this. We had a large book. It was about that thick. It had yellow pages in it, and that was our Google right back
Jeez
there. So you had to
Louise.
actually know the alphabet.
And if you were in a small enough town, it had white pages too.
Oh, yes, included in the yellow pages. See, we're both
Dated ourselves, yeah.
What can I tell you? I love talking to the kids about this stuff.
Yeah.
If they just, anyway, but we didn't have any of that stuff. Finding a flight school, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what had changed. We didn't have any of that. So fast forward, I was sitting at a dinner one night at West Houston with the airport manager and some AOPA executives. This is way before I worked for AOPA. And I was sitting and talking to a fellow across the table from me who worked for AOPA. He's not there anymore. And we were talking about how can we stem the flow of, or the, I guess the people, stem the flow of people leaving aviation. Mm-hmm. And he had mentioned that there was a flight school somewhere up in that part of the country that had created a program. They didn't call it Rusty Pilot, but it was something kind of like that. And I thought, that would be really something good. Anyway, one thing led to another. I didn't think anything more about it. 3 or 4 months later, I get a phone call from headquarters. Again, I wasn't working for them. I was doing some ASI seminars and things like that, but as a contractor. Mm-hmm. And a guy called me and said, how would you like to write a Rusty Pilot program? Well, that sounds like fun. He said, why don't you choose one of your other ASI presenters and you guys put together a Rusty Pilot program. So I called Mark Grady, who was a radio and TV guy, with his background in radio and TV, and I thought, okay, he's a media guy. So together we worked and put together the very first iteration of Rusty Pilot, and we started testing it. Tested about a year. And we thought, headquarters thought, there's something to this. So they took the bones of what we had done and kind of AOPA-ified it, made it a little bit slicker and better graphics and things like that. And we began to do that. And this has been probably now 7 years maybe. Wow. We've done well over 1,000 of those things. I've got a number here. I don't want to look like I'm reading, Dan. But we've done about 1,000 live versions. We've reached, I think, well over 50,000 people. We've got 12,000 people that we can actually look at and say, these people are back in the air now as a result of Rusty Pilot. COVID put us back a little bit, so we added webinars to that. And so for about 2 years during the COVID thing, we did nothing but webinars. But even that, we were finding that somewhere around 30% of the people that would be registered for the webinars and attended would actually go back and get into the left seat eventually.
That's remarkable.
So it was good. So how long has it been since you've flown?
Well, I've flown recently, but prior to that, gosh, probably 3 months, like my first semester of college, and it's something that's heartbreaking for me personally, right, because I was so deep involved within aviation.
Right.
I mean, it is a sincere passion, but ultimately, like, just transitioning to a different city, starting a new journey with
Right.
college, like
Right.
a whole new lifestyle. It's hard to find that balance.
And the lower amount of hours that you have, the greater the pilot atrophy is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had like 10,000 hours flying airplanes and then you stopped, you'd be a little rusty, but it'd come back to you quicker, versus if you had 100 or 200, you stop flying, you come back, it's going to take a
Right.
little bit longer.
And it's
How
like
many hours did you have when you quit? Or since
paused.
Paused. I think so. Yeah. Thank you.
I think, gosh, probably just shy of 200.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's kind of I'll say a soft spot, if you will. One of my examiner buddies calls it soft knowledge, and it hasn't yet quite drilled its way into a permanent place in your brain. And so things like radio communications, well, what did I have to read back? I can't, what do I have to read back? Taxi instructions, what is that line, that solid line there? Do I have to stop in front of that solid line or don't I? Some of those kind of things at a low number of hours, it's like, boy, I just don't remember that, especially if you haven't been doing it on a regular basis.
Right.
The buttons in the cockpit.
Yeah, I would say for me personally, like it wasn't necessarily the flying aspect of it, kind of like you touched on. It was almost like riding a bike, picking it up again, you know? But certain things like the buttons in the cockpit or just like basic aeronautical knowledge that I should totally be coherent of, but was just kind of fuzzy on.
Yeah.
And of course, naturally, that's things that I eventually picked up again quickly and was like, of course I knew that.
But you've only been out of it for 3 months.
Right.
So you've only paused for
Right.
3 months. And, you know, the longer that goes, regardless of how many hours you have, the more that's going to be like go away.
Yeah.
What I notice when I do check rides, and which, you know, is kind of a fancy version of a rusty pilot thing, is airspace knowledge. Especially young pilots, I don't mean chronological years young, but just people that are new to it, really have a problem with airspace. Almost universally have a problem with airspace and chart symbology and map reading and things like that. And that happens when you become a rusty pilot. You forget about the map symbology and you forget about you know, the various types of airspaces, A, B, C, D, E, and G. We don't have F in the United States. So those are the kind of things that we cover in Rusty Pilot. We actually have a scenario, and the scenario is this. We're starting in Sarasota, Florida, Class Charlie airspace. We're flying through Class Echo airspace. We land in Sebring, which is a Class Golf airport. Then we take off from Sebring and we go to Kissimmee, and that's a Delta airport that underlies Class Bravo airspace in Florida. So why do we do that? Because it takes you through every kind of airspace.
Because even now, I'm like, gears are turning. I'm like, wait.
What was that? What does that look
There
like?
you go.
Right? So we talk about those kind of things, and we actually take a flight and we look at METARs and we look at TAFs. We look at required cruising altitudes, the odd and even plus 500, and when that kicks in. We look at you know, the various chart symbols for Class Echo airspace, you know, the wide magenta line that starts with a hard edge and fades away and those kind of things. And we talk about some memory items that can help you remember. For example, Class Charlie airspace is always surrounded by two concentric circles. Well, what do those two words start with?
C.
It's
Exactly.
always two concentric circles. D, that is a dashed line, right? D starts with a dash.
D, yeah.
Dash starts with the letter D.
My mind right now just.
Mind boggle.
Class Bravo, you know, again, from a Rusty Pilot standpoint, if you can remember that Class Bravo is the biggest, baddest, busiest airport.
Yes, I was just about to say that.
Where Boeings fly into, all of those are B words.
There you go.
You know, so when you start to throw in some of those mnemonics and things like that we talk about, another thing we talk about is we're not trying to get them to pass a written test. We're just trying to get them safe and legal to get through their flight review, because most of them haven't had their flight review yet. So if you stop and think that it's really simple to stay legal in Class B, C, D, E, and at night Class E, C, D, E, and at night Class E, your cloud clearance and visibility requirements are all 3152s.
Right.
If you maintain those in those airspaces, B, C, D, E, and at night Class G, I'm sorry, B, C, D. Here,
You're
you see-
good. You're good.
Wow, I'm getting rusty.
Yeah.
So B, C, D, E, and at night Class G. If you maintain 3152s, you're legal.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because it's like things like that are the little intricacies. Pilots like me who become rusty get so bogged down in those because ultimately you lose confidence. You know, you realize there's so many areas where I should be proficient and I'm not, and then you become scared to step in the plane again. You know, because at the end of the day, it boils down to safety, right?
That's
and
right.
so, and it's not also just memorizing everything, it's fully understanding it and being able to apply it. So that being said, what's one thing that you think pilots should consider, rusty pilots should consider as like their first step, getting back involved, knocking that rust off?
Boy, it's hard. I think it's hard to nail down just one, but certainly
Yeah, just a couple of the first steps you would recommend.
you know, maybe dialing into one of the online ground schools. I mean, there's a lot of them that are available. I don't want to mention any one particular, but there are a lot of them that are available out there. You can do a Google search. That would be one way to at least begin to get back into it. If you're an AOPA member, you can go to rustypilots.org, rustypilots.org, and you can actually do an online version of the live webinar, of the live seminar, to kind of get you started. In fact, you can go back and you can repeat that as many times as you want. Even if you do a live one, you can do that as many times as you want. And so those probably be the two that I would recommend.
I have a question.
Sure.
So,
As long as it's not on
pilots.
Airspace, because
Yeah, right.
I don't know mine.
Okay, airline pilots.
Yeah.
They've been flying airliners for the last 2 decades, haven't touched a GA airplane in as many years.
Yeah.
Would you consider those rusty pilots?
I would consider them dangerous. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, folks. I'm really kidding. No, but all kidding aside, we actually have a program for that too.
Okay.
Wow, that's
You
awesome.
didn't know that, did
I
you?
did not know
It's
that.
called Back to Your Roots.
Oh,
I like
love
it.
And
So
it's Rusty
clever.
Pilots for airline pilots.
See, that's great because as president of our flying club out of Denton, shameless plug, we actually get requests from a lot of airline pilots. They've been out of it for 5, 10, 20 years. They
Yeah.
want to get back into GA flying. It's really great to have that resource. I've actually always just sent them to Rusty Pilots.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that there is that pathway for them to re-up on their GA knowledge.
Yeah. It's really interesting because the kind of the bones of that were built on Rusty. But we talk about things like what you have to do as a GA pilot that you don't have a flight ops department to do for you. Things like plan the trip, things like weight and balance, and all those things that are really, really important to do.
Yeah, dispatch does that for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So-
So those kinds of things are covered in Back to Your Roots. We talk about GPS approaches, and some types of GPS approaches that I'm not an airline guy, I never have been, so I don't know exactly what you guys have, but
We get to do LNAV, VNAV.
okay.
We do not have LPV.
Okay, so we talk
So,
about that.
yeah.
We talk about ADSB and where it's required and things. Again, stuff that you would think that maybe an airline pilot knows, but if somebody's really just been flying in flight levels for 20 years, even airspace. Once you're cleared on a flight plan on the airline level, you're cleared through every airspace that you have to fly through. You don't have to think about it, right? So for us, we talk about all of the various airspaces and the cloud clearance and visibility requirements and things like that. It's called Back to Your Roots. In fact, we've got one coming up. Brian Schiff is doing it online. Right now, they're only online. But I can't remember the date. Go to aopa.org, or if anybody wants just to email me, it's pat.brown@aopa.org. I'll find the information for you, for the folks that are interested in that. But Back to Your Roots is kind of an offshoot of Rusty. Yeah.
That's awesome. So aside from actually getting back in the air again, what's something that you would recommend to pilots who want to become proficient again, but really just don't have the time to fly? Like, is there anything besides like the webinar or seminar that we could do to study?
Well, again, rustypilots.org gives you the webinar. There's an array of online courses, as we started to talk about earlier. Chair flying. If you ever just thought about sitting in your chair at home with your eyes closed and just imagining the cockpit in front of you, and here's the yoke and here's the throttle, or depending on what kind of airplane you're flying, and here's the 6-pack or the glass panel or whatever, and can you reach out and touch the various controls that you might want to touch with your eyes closed, for example? Maybe just mentally run through the steps for setting up slow flight, or power off stall, or a steep turn, or something like that. And visualizing the fact that in a side-by-side airplane, a left-hand steep turn looks different out of the windshield than a right-hand steep turn does because of the parallax. You're sitting on the upper or upside or downside of the turn. So some of those things would be what I would recommend. Chair flying, probably the biggest.
And if you're really hardcore with it, you could get one of those like at-home simulator setups like Desktop Pilot or any one of those, and kind of go through the motions and rebuild that muscle memory.
Simulators are really good for certain things. They don't, the ones that most of us can afford don't really offer you much in the way of tactile feel. So you're not really getting any pushback or feel when you're doing something like that. So it can be difficult, or challenging, I should say, to be able to use a simulator to stay, let's say, proficient in your landings. I don't mean legally current, but proficient in your landings, because you don't really have any tactile feedback. Sometimes there's no peripheral vision. It's hard to do that. But the procedural stuff, especially for instrument flying, but the procedural stuff is good. Setting up for slow flight, setting up for steep turns, setting up for stalls, things like that. Again, you don't get the tactile feedback, but the muscle memory of setting up the controls and things like that, that's helpful.
That is some really great information. Thank you so much again, Pat, for coming on. We just love you. We also love our sponsors. So, Baylee, we need to remember all of our sponsors. We got this, girl.
Yes.
Okay. We'd like to thank Flying Eyes, the best flying eyes you could have. FlyingEyesOptics.com. For 10% off, taking off all caps, one word I'm going to do it the Dan Milliken way.
There you go, there you
All
go.
right.
We also want to thank 67 Designs, Clements Insurance, Colton Mortgage. Help me out here. Where's some
We
others?
got Marshall Protective Service.
There we go.
Z-Vision.
Yes.
I got to do it like Dan.
Yeah.
The best landing and navigation lights available for your airplane. All right. Did we get all of them?
I think we did.
Wait, Flying Eyes, Colton Mortgage.
Yeah. Okay,
We got it.
I think we're
Guys, if we
good.
missed them, we're so sorry. But we love our sponsors and we love our viewers. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you for supporting the channel. Please like, subscribe, and share our content. We'll see you all next time.
In the hangar.